Allah, in the name of the most affectionate, the most merciful. As-salam alaikum, Tadabbur cast, where thought meets revelation. وَنُنزِلُ مِنَ الْقُرْآنِ مَا هُوَ شِفَاءٌ وَرَحْمَةٌ. We reveal from the Quran that which is a healing and a mercy.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking a deep dive into foundational beliefs, tenets of faith, really.
Specifically as presented in, a particular set of sources focusing on Sunni Islamic creed.
Right. And we've got religious texts here discussing core beliefs, some biographical info, and actually quite a few sections that get into refutations of different viewpoints.
Yeah, our mission here is basically to unpack these fundamental beliefs, understand the different aspects they cover,
And explore some of the, let's say, historical and theological discussions, the debates that are highlighted in these materials.
Exactly, and they're remarkably detailed.
They really are. We're going to touch on some pretty vast descriptions of the afterlife, look into some surprising claims about, say, the nature of knowledge, and examine some, well, very strong critiques leveled against certain beliefs that these texts consider outside the mainstream.
Definitely.
Okay, so let's start unpacking this, the core material. Where do we begin?
Well, the absolute foundation starts with beliefs about Allah. According to these sources, he is the highest, the most majestic, the greatest.
Okay.
His power and knowledge are absolute. They encompass everything and everyone, and nothing can encompass him.
A key point seems to be that all benefit and harm, welfare, ruin, it's all solely in his power.
That's a core tenet presented here, yes.
Yeah.
Blessing, deprivation, all his power.
And the sources really emphasize that nothing happens without his will.
Precisely. His will is supreme. The texts also note he's pleased with good deeds.
And displeased with bad deeds and sins. Makes sense.
Right. And there's a philosophical point tucked in there, too, that the non-existent isn't considered a thing.
Interesting. So establishing that absolute power and will of the divine is like step one. And building on that, these texts discuss something quite profound, divine vision.
Yes. The sources clearly state believers will see Allah in paradise with their waking eyes.
So not just metaphorically.
No, described as a real vision. One of the greatest blessings granted, in fact.
Okay, now here's where it gets interesting theologically. The sources delve into the possibility of seeing Allah with waking eyes, but in this world.
Right, and there's debate mentioned. Some groups, like the Mu'tazila cited in the sources, denied this possibility entirely.
And some scholars went pretty far with that denial, didn't they?
Some did, yeah, deeming belief in that possibility in this world as disbelief. But the al-Sunnah position, which covers both Ash'ari and Maturidi schools, holds that it is rationally and scripturally possible to see Allah in this world.
Possible, but not common.
Not the common experience, no. But it is considered proven for certain individuals, most notably Prophet Muhammad during the Miraj, the Ascension.
So divine vision is presented as both the ultimate reward, in the next life, and something deemed possible, though rare, even here, for specific people. It really shows how highly valued that direct spiritual connection is in this framework.
Exactly. It frames the peak of human potential, or maybe divine grace, in terms of that very connection.
Okay, let's shift focus a bit from the divine to created beings discussed here, angels and jinn.
Right. Angels are described as honorable slaves created from light.
And their key characteristic?
Complete obedience. They obey all of Allah's commands without fail. Their roles are varied too.
Like what?
Delivering revelation, obviously Jibril, making rain, controlling winds, delivering sustenance. And a specific detail mentioned is their role in fashioning faces in mothers' wombs.
Wow.
And dispensing, sort of, things within human bodies.
That's a very detailed view of divine involvement through these beings. And then the jinn.
Jinn, created from fire. The sources make sure to highlight that Iblis, Satan, is from the jinn.
Okay.
And there's an intriguing detail mentioned. Common humans and jinn apparently can't hear the dead speak, but animals can.
That is a surprising nugget. Animals having a kind of spiritual sense that humans lack in this context.
Seems so, according to this text. And the sources take a very firm stance on believing in both angels and jinn. Absolutely firm. Disbelieving in their existence is classified as heresy. Even kufr, disbelief.
Real?
Yes. They cite historical figures like Sir Syed Ahmad Khan and his followers, calling their Nightshuri philosophy a denial of supernatural beings.
So belief in these specific entities isn't like optional theology, it's foundational stuff, according to these sources.
Very much so.
Okay, let's move on to the status of prophets. These sources place them incredibly high.
They're considered superior to all other creation, including even the highest-ranking messenger angels.
Superior to angels.
Yes. And these texts are explicit. No non-prophet can ever be equal to or superior to a prophet.
And claiming otherwise.
Is ruled as disbelief kafir in these materials, plain and simple.
And the obligation towards them, what's required?
It's presented as an obligatory duty for everyone, respect and reverence for all prophets.
All of them.
All of them. The sources state that any act of disrespect or belying them, no matter how minor it might seem, is considered apostasy. That shows the immense theological weight placed on their position.
Wow. Okay. A core concept here is divine immunity, Masham. How do the sources explain that?
Right. Prophets are believed to be sinless, immune from committing sins, both major and minor.
Both big and small sins.
Correct. And this immunity applies both before they received revelation and after.
Before and after.
Yes. It's particularly emphasized regarding Prophet Muhammad. Now, the sources do address interpretations of Quranic verses that might seem to imply otherwise.
Like verses addressing Prophet Muhammad about sin?
Exactly. These texts interpret such verses in specific ways, like maybe referring to choosing a lesser good among permissible options, which isn't really a sin in the usual sense, or that the address, while directed at him, is actually primarily meant for his followers, using him as the example for guidance.
I see. What about the prophet's knowledge? Especially knowledge of the unseen, the gaib.
The sources present a specific understanding here. Prophets are given knowledge of the unseen by Allah.
That's the key distinction. Given by Allah.
Yes. It's bestowed knowledge. Not absolute independent knowledge that belongs only to Allah.
Okay.
The sources cite specific hadith traditions as evidence for the scope of this bestowed knowledge.
Like what kind of scope?
Like one hadith mentioning Prophet Muhammad seeing the world and future events as clearly as his palm, or another describing a moment where he felt a coolness between his shoulders and everything was illuminated to him, granting him knowledge of the heavens and earth.
And these sources directly tackle the argument that attributing this kind of knowledge to the prophet somehow limits God's knowledge, or is polytheism.
Yes, they explicitly refute that idea. Their argument is kind of the reverse.
How so?
They argue that denying the prophet this bestowed knowledge would actually imply a limitation on Allah's ability to grant knowledge to whomever he wills. It's framed as an honor, a capability granted by Allah, not some independent power.
Got it. So prophets have this uniquely high protected status, and they're granted specific knowledge by the divine. Now, according to these sources, one prophet stands above all the rest.
Absolutely. Prophet Muhammad, presented as uniquely superior, the chief of all prophets.
The chief.
Yes. The belief is that he was the first prophet in creation to be sort of brought into existence.
The first created.
In that sense, yes. And the last one to be sent chronologically. He's the seal of prophets, Khatam al-Nabiyyin.
And the finality of his prophethood is a really major point.
Oh, fundamental. According to these texts, denying his status as the seal of prophets is explicitly ruled as disbelief. Kuf.
Why so strong?
Because it contradicts a clear, unambiguous Quranic verse.
Okay. The night journey and ascension, the Isra and Miraj, are also highlighted as essential beliefs, right?
Belief in them as a physical journey, body and soul, is deemed obligatory.
Physical, not just spiritual.
Yes, physical. Denying it or claiming it was merely a dream is considered heresy, according to these sources.
And Prophet Muhammad also has a unique station on Judgment Day.
He does. The exclusive station of praise, Maqam al-Muhammad, a station of immense prominence and authority.
And his role in intercession on that day. That's described in a lot of detail.
It is. He's granted various types of intercession, reflecting his unique standing.
Like what types?
Intercession for people to enter paradise without any accounting.
Wow.
For saving people who were actually sentenced to hell.
Yeah.
For removing people who have already entered hell. And even for reducing punishment for some within hell.
That's quite a range of intercessory role.
It underscores his exceptional position and grace in the eyes of Allah, according to these texts.
And for believers, the obligation towards him is profound. It goes beyond just respect, doesn't it?
Oh, yes. There's a profound obligation to love Prophet Muhammad more than anyone else.
More than family, your own life.
Even more than one's own life. These sources cite a specific hadith to this effect. This love is presented as a sign of complete faith.
And respecting him now, after his passing.
Just as believers were required to when he was physically alive. The sources strongly emphasize this, being very mindful of the language used when referring to him.
So no casual or irreverent terms?
Exactly. That's seen as contrary to the reverence due.
His authority, too. It's presented as directly linked to divine authority.
Obedience to Prophet Muhammad is presented as obedience to Allah.
And he was given authority.
The sources state he was given the authority to make things lawful or forbidden.
By God.
Yes, not independently, but as authority bestowed by Allah himself. One source even points to a specific scholarly work just on this topic, showing how theologically important it is.
Okay. So we've established these core beliefs. Divine, created beings, prophets, especially Prophet Muhammad's unique status. Where do these sources take us on the journey beyond this life? Let's trace that path, starting with the realm of the dead, barzakh.
Right. Death is defined fundamentally as the separation of the soul from the body.
And the soul itself.
The sources explicitly state that believing the soul is annihilated is heresy. It persists.
And we circle back to that detail about the dead speaking.
Yes, heard by animals, but not by common humans or jinn. That detail comes up again here.
The initial physical experience after death. The sources describe it quite vividly.
The grave's embrace is mentioned. For a Muslim, it's described as a loving squeeze, like a mother's embrace.
But for a disbeliever,
a powerful, rib-crushing force. A stark contrast.
And then comes the interrogation.
Yes, in the grave, by the angels Munkar and Nakir. A Muslim, through faith, is able to give the correct responses about their Lord, their religion, and the messenger.
And the consequences, reward or punishment, they begin immediately, right there in the grave.
That's what's described. Reward and comfort or punishment experienced within the grave itself based on one's deeds in life.
Any details on the reward side?
The graves of the pious are described as being extended, made spacious, and filled with light.
What about ideas like reincarnation?
Strongly refuted in these sources. Called a pagan fantasy. They emphasize there's only one life on earth, no second chances after death.
And they back that up.
Yes, citing specific Quranic verses.
Okay. This then leads us towards the end times, the signs of the hour, Ishraj al-Zaha.
Events that signal the approach of the Day of Judgment. They're usually categorized into minor and major signs.
Let's start with the minor ones.
One mention is the appearance of 30 minor Dajjal's claimants of prophethood after Prophet Muhammad.
False prophets.
Exactly. Historical examples like Musalama and Sajar mentioned. Also a more modern figure, Mirza Ghulam of Qadian.
And the sources describe specific events related to them.
Yes, things that happened which were contrary to their claims, described as disgraces ihana, intended to expose their falsehood.
What other minor signs do the sources list? Anything about society or time?
Yes, several. Time passing quickly, a year feeling like a month, a week like a day, and so on.
A subjective speeding up of time.
Seems like it. Also, people neglecting mandatory charity, zakat, seeing it just as a tax.
Acquiring religious knowledge for worldly reasons?
Right, not for genuine piety or guidance. And another sign mentioned is a man obeying his wife, which is presented as indicating a shift in societal norms or perhaps priorities.
Interesting. Okay, and then the major signs. These sound pretty dramatic.
They are. Universally significant events, like 3 specific earthquakes in Medina.
In Medina.
Yes, after which those without faith will leave the city. Then, the appearance of the major Dajjal, the great deceiver.
The Antichrist figure.
In a sense. He's described notably as being accompanied by groups of Jews and having the word kafir, disbeliever, etched on his forehead.
Visible to whom?
Visible only to Muslims, according to these texts.
Then comes Imam Mahdi.
Yes, the guided one. Considered a vice-regent of Allah, people will pledge allegiance to him.
And a figure central to Christianity and Judaism also plays a key role here.
Prophet Isa, Jesus. His descent is a major sign.
What does he do?
He will descend and notably pray behind Imam Mahdi.
Signifying what?
His adherence to Prophet Muhammad's law, showing continuity. Then he will slay the Dajjal.
He defeats the deceiver.
Yes, and break the cross, slay the pig, and abolish the jizya, the tax on non-Muslims living under Muslim rule at that time.
What other major signs are listed?
The sun rising from the west, a profound reversal of natural order.
The appearance of the beast of the earth.
The release of Yajuj and Majugog and Magog.
A great smoke covering the earth.
Yes. And finally, a fire that will emerge and gather all people together for the assembly on the Day of Judgment.
That's quite a sequence. Intense picture of the lead-up. What about the Day of Judgment itself?
Qiyamah, described as a time of immense terror, upheaval, children turning old from sheer dread.
pregnant women miscarrying.
Yes, people appearing intoxicated from the horror, though they aren't drunk, just overwhelmed.
This terrifying moment is followed by the assembly, the hash.
Right. Souls are reunited with their resurrected bodies for this gathering.
Bodily resurrection is key then.
Absolutely. According to these sources, denying bodily resurrection is considered disbelief. It denies Allah's power.
And then people start looking for help. Intercession.
A desperate search begins. People go to the prophets one by one, Adam, then Noah, Abraham, Moses, Jesus.
And each directs them onwards.
Yes, until they are all finally directed to Prophet Muhammad. He undertakes the major intercession, seeking permission from Allah for the judgment to actually begin.
Are there other intercessors?
The sources mention others, yes. Granted permission by Allah, friends of Allah, saints, martyrs, scholars, those who memorize the Quran.
Even ordinary Muslims.
Even ordinary Muslims interceding for one another.
After that, the weighing of deeds.
The scales, the mizan, described as real and true. Deeds are weighed. Your fate hinges on whether the good deeds are heavy or light.
And denying the scales.
Also considered disbelief in these texts, it denies divine justice and accountability.
Then comes the reckoning, the Aazami.
The detailed accounting of one's life, followed by receiving the book of deeds.
Right hand or left hand?
Right hand signifies success, salvation. Left hand, or receiving it behind your back, signifies misery and doom.
And denying the accounting or the books?
Also deemed disbelief.
Before crossing over to paradise, there's mention of the pool of Kauthar.
Yes, a vast, blessed pool in paradise, granted specifically to Prophet Muhammad. Denying its existence is also classified as disbelief in these texts.
Okay. And finally, everyone faces the bridge. The Shams.
It's described as real, true, stretched over hellfire.
And the description is sharp.
Thinner than a hair, sharper than a sword. That's the vivid description. It's the only path to paradise. Everyone must attempt to cross it.
Who crosses first?
Prophet Muhammad is the first to successfully cross. And again, denying the bridge is considered disbelief according to these sources. It emphasizes the singular, perilous path to salvation.
These sources are incredibly clear about the reality, the nature of the ultimate destinations after all this.
Absolutely. Paradise, Jana, a real place, created for believers, filled with unimaginable delights.
The descriptions are quite something.
Vivid, streams of pure water, unspoiled milk, delicious non-intoxicating wine, pure honey, homes of pearls and rubies.
And the brilliance.
Extraordinary. Even the lowest home in paradise is said to illuminate the earth from east to west. That's the scale described.
And the ultimate blessing within paradise.
Divine vision, the bashar. Mentioned again here as the absolute peak of reward, believers will see Allah about a went after entering paradise.
And denying paradise, or this divine vision.
Considered disbelief. It tells us that, according to these sources, the highest possible reward is that spiritual connection, seeing the divine face.
And then the other side, hell. Jahannam.
Also described as a real place, the destination for disbelievers and some sinners. For disbelievers, the punishment is everlasting.
How is it described?
Severe heat. Even worldly fire is said to seek refuge from it. They detail horrific food, zakum, gizlin, terrible drinks, amim, shadid.
Any interaction for the inhabitants.
They call out to the keeper, Malik, only to be told they will remain, and they are forbidden to speak to Allah.
Other torments mentioned.
Skin being replaced as it burns off, disbelievers trapped in boxes with fire locks. Denying hell itself is also considered disbelief.
So the paths are clear. The reckoning is precise, the destinations are real, and for disbelievers, eternal. This naturally brings us to how these sources define faith and disbelief themselves. What is faith, Yaman?
Faith is defined as sincerely accepting and attesting to every single thing deemed a necessary precept of religion. A
daruri. What does that mean exactly?
Think of it as something widely known, accepted by basically everyone within the community as an essential, undeniable part of the religion, a fundamental.
Okay, and disbelief, Kufr?
Disbelief is rejecting or denying even one of those necessary precepts, just one, even if you accept all the others.
So it's an all or nothing on the fundamentals.
That's how it's presented here, yes, rejecting a known fundamental truth.
There's a particularly strong point made about saying something considered disbelief, even if you don't really mean it in your heart.
Yes. These sources state that uttering a word deemed disbelief, even if it's in jest or carelessly, without actually believing it inside, is considered apostasy. Unless there's a valid excuse, like being under duress, forced to say it. Otherwise, it's seen as slighting the religion itself.
And they mention scholarly consensus on this.
They highlight a consensus on this point, yes.
The sources also mention the two major schools of Sunni creed, right?
The Ash'ari and Maturidi schools. The sources note their differences are generally on secondary or maybe tertiary issues, not fundamentals.
How many differences?
One source mentions about 13 specific points of difference, mostly relating to interpretation, finer theological points.
Like what?
They briefly touch on differing views about whether faith and iman itself increases or decreases, or if it's the number of things believed in, or maybe the effects of faith, like good deeds, that increase or decrease. It shows there's nuance even within the accepted framework on non-core issues.
What about hypocrites? How are they described?
As those who outwardly profess Islam, they look Muslim on the outside but lack internal faith. They're seen as vacillating, shifting between faith and disbelief depending on the situation.
Okay. Now, these sources spend a, significant amount of time identifying views and groups they classify as heretical or even blasphemous.
They do.
And it's crucial here for us and for you listening that we present these points strictly as the claims and rulings made within this source material. We need to understand why these texts view them this way from their own theological perspective.
Absolutely crucial. We're reporting on the content of the sources. So they identify various groups and individuals whose beliefs or statements they deem outside the accepted Sunni creed.
Like the Mu'tazila again.
Yes, they're criticized again here, specifically for denying divine vision, which we saw is a core belief and the ultimate reward in these texts.
And for their view on prophet sins.
Right. Believing prophets could commit small sins deliberately. That contradicts a concept of mashun, divine immunity, as these sources define it.
The Rafidis, often associated with Shia Islam, also receive strong critique.
Yes, the sources attribute several beliefs to them that are ruled as patent disbelief, kufr, according to these texts.
Such as?
Slandering the companions of the prophet. That's seen as disrespecting the very people who transmitted the religion.
Believing imams are superior to prophets.
Yes, that's explicitly ruled as kufri in these sources because it overturns the established hierarchy of prophets being supreme.
What else?
Denying the marriage of Sayyida Kulthum, the daughter of Imam Ali and Fatima to Umar ibn al-Khattab. This is seen as rejecting historical fact preserved in Sunni accounts.
Believing the Quran isn't preserved.
Also ruled as kufr. That challenges the integrity of the divine text itself.
And the idea that imams are divinely protected from error, mash.
That belief attributed to them contrasts with the Sunni belief presented here, which holds that only prophets and angels have that specific level of divine protection from error.
So, according to these sources, deviations can range from denying core realities like divine vision to challenging the status of key figures like companions or prophets, or even the integrity of the Quran.
Exactly. And then the sources get very specific about certain individuals. They detail alleged blasphemies or heresies attributed to them and the strong rulings made against those views within the source material.
Mirza Ghulam of Qadiyani is mentioned again.
Yes. Specifically, his claim to prophethood after Prophet Muhammad, which, as we discussed, directly contradicts the seal of prophets' belief and is ruled kufr.
And other specific claims attributed to him.
The sources list several ruled as kufr, like calling his own book Speech of God, saying prophets like Musa, Moses, and Isa, Jesus, were imperfect guides, claiming prophecies can be false, even denying the prophethood of Jesus.
Why are these seen as so serious?
They're viewed as challenging the established roles, the validity of divine communication, and the status of previous prophets. And the sources reiterate those disgraces, the ihana, that allegedly befell him as signs of his falsehood.
Okay. Another figure named as Ismail Dilawi. Several beliefs attributed to him are ruled heretical, polytheistic, shirk, or disbelief, kufr in this material.
That's right. According to these texts, claims attributed to him that they rule problematic include things like deeming belief in Allah's transcendence from direction, or seeing him without direction as heresy.
Why is that problematic for these sources?
Because these sources emphasize the traditional understanding of divine attributes, which includes transcendence. Also, claiming Allah hasn't given dispensing power to creation.
That's seen as limiting God.
Potentially, yes. Limiting Allah's ability to act through means or grant authority. Calling belief in intercession shirk, polytheism, is a major point of contention.
Because these sources firmly uphold intercession.
Yes, as something granted by Allah, not an independent power. Then there's a highly controversial point attributed to him.
Which one?
Claiming Satan's knowledge is greater than Prophet Muhammad's, and claiming that attributing knowledge of the unseen to the Prophet means animals must have it too. These are seen as profound insults to the Prophet's status and bestowed knowledge.
What else attributed to him is criticized?
The sources rule as shirk bid'ah, polytheism and innovation, certain practices like making Medina a sanctuary in a specific way, or believing saints are present and watching or have dispensing power. These are viewed as associating partners with God.
What about the Prophet's authority to make things lawful forbidden?
Attributing that as polytheism is also ruled as such by these texts, seen as denying a divinely granted authority.
There's also mention of a view on divine speech.
Yes, a controversial statement attributed to his group suggesting falsehood is possible in divine speech without impacting faith. The sources vehemently reject this as challenging God's perfection.
And his interpretation of seal of prophets.
His view, as presented by the sources, that it could mean superiority in rank for intellectuals rather than just chronological finality, is criticized for undermining the clear textual meaning.
Okay. Finally, Ashraf Ali Thanawi is mentioned.
Yes. The source attributes a specific quote to him, allegedly stating that thinking of the prophet or Shaykh, spiritual guide, during prayer is worse than thinking of a cow or a donkey.
And the ruling on that?
Ruled as blasphemous in these texts, seen as a profound disrespect to the prophet. And he's linked in these sources to the ideas associated with Ismail Dilawi.
So this section, really presented through the lens of these specific sources, lays out various views they deem outside the accepted Sunni creed, with very strong theological rulings attached, based on what these sources consider violations of core tenets.
Whether it's about the nature of God, the status of prophets, the integrity of texts, or specific practices, yeah.
And again, it's vital we reiterate these are the specific rulings and classifications as presented within the source material regarding these individuals, groups, and their attributed beliefs.
Absolutely essential to keep that framing in mind.
Now, to give a bit more context on the source material itself, it does mention some key scholars by name.
It does. Scholars like Imam Ahmad Rida Khan, known for his extensive work compiling hadith, legal rulings, theology, and Maulana Amjad Ali, the author of the large encyclopedia of Hanafi jurisprudence, from which a lot of this material seems drawn.
Figures central to the tradition these sources represent.
Exactly.
There's also that interesting anecdote about translating the Quran into Urdu, Khan's Aliman.
Right. Maulana Amjad Ali recounts the incredibly rigorous standards Imam Ahmad Rida Khan applied to that translation.
What were the conditions?
Extremely strict. It had to be absolutely truthful, encompass all intended meanings, be grammatically perfect, free from any commentary inserted into the text itself.
Wow.
Express the utmost reverence for the divine and the prophet, and be completely accurate without adding or omitting anything. It just highlights the immense seriousness, the meticulousness these scholars brought to transmitting sacred knowledge.
And understanding these specific creedal points correctly, according to these sources, is presented as just profoundly important.
Indeed. The text strongly emphasized the necessity of clarity and strict adherence to what they define as the necessary tenets of faith. Any deviation is viewed as having significant, serious consequences.
Wow. Okay, that has been a really comprehensive deep dive. We've gone through core beliefs, the journey hereafter, the whole theological landscape, including these controversies as presented in these specific Sunni Islamic creedal texts. We've covered the nature of the divine, created beings like angels and jinn, the incredibly high status and role of prophets, especially Prophet Muhammad.
The path beyond this life, too, from the grave through the signs to Judgment Day itself.
And the ultimate destinations, paradise and hell, described in such detail. And we explored how these sources define faith and disbelief.
Alongside their very strong critiques of views they deem heretical, really trying to understand the types of theological principles these sources feel are being violated in those cases.
We've definitely seen the depth, the sheer detail of these theological discussions, and the profound seriousness with which matters of belief and its boundaries are treated within these traditions.
Absolutely. It's intricate stuff.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Considering the absolute emphasis these sources place on correct belief, defined down to very specific points, and the very strong condemnations of differing views presented within them, how does one navigate understanding and adhering to faith, especially in a world filled with such diverse and sometimes conflicting religious claims and interpretations?
It's certainly a lot to consider.
It is definitely something to think about as you process everything we've covered today.
Check the description for the free book PDF and other essential links. Don't miss them. That's it for today. Stay mindful, stay blessed. Assalamu alaikum.